now we will turn it over to Henry Mora. If you don't have a problem with me, with me talking from here, I'll do it. Well, this is the title of my presentation. I need to clarify 2 points before. Even though we're going to be talking about wealth and capitalist wealth and a critique of capitalist wealth, in actual fact, capital does not create wealth. As a matter of fact, no institution ever creates wealth. Capital does not create wealth, the market does not create wealth, the state does not create wealth, and no institutional form creates wealth. They can be the means for the creation of social wealth. The only originary forms for the creation of human wealth are the nature and the human being. And even from a certain perspective, not even the human being. From a certain perspective, a physicist perspective, the human beings transform, but they do not create as such. However, I will address my message from the perspective of social wealth and stemming from the fact that two originary sources of wealth are nature and the human being. When we talk about capitalist wealth, we're actually referring to one form of creation of wealth, whose main methods, number one, are accumulation, number two, depossession. Even though we can say accumulation is a form of depossession as well. At the end of the day, accumulating means accumulating value and surplus, and therefore there's always an unequal treatment with respect to its implicit exploitation. And the second clarification is that some of the slides will be a little full of text, but just focus on the highlights, on the highlighted parts or in the letters in bold. So these are my guiding questions for the preparation of my presentation, and I stuck to that guide. Therefore, what I'm doing is try to answer these 5 questions. Each of these 5 questions in turn is subdivided into 2 or 3 or even 4. So as a matter of fact, it's actually 15 questions. Both the questions and the answers, of course, are tentative or just partial. They might be wrong. And this is what this is about. The idea is for us to be able to learn. Next. Well, the first question is, how can we radically reduce the economic ties between people, especially the great dependence on markets and the concentration of wealth? Therefore, here we're facing 3 problems. Economic ties between people, and, of course, we mean not ties in general, but those asymmetrical forms of dependence, and those domination relationships, and not the interdependence, not interdependence in general, which is an objective law that focuses on social distinction, differentiation of labor. Next, we live and we exist in interdependence and eco-dependence, and this is a law based on the social division of labor. The problem is not the social division of labor per se, but that form of interdependence that I want to call coactive division of labor. Marx calls it, in his manuscript, natural division of work in 44-45, but sometimes he just refers to division of labor, but he really refers to the natural division of labor, which is preferable to call a coactive division of work, to differentiate it from the other form of interdependence of division of work, which is the voluntary division of labor. In capitalism, the body, the skeleton of his structure of production relationships, its coordination, social coordination structure of labor, in that there are 2 predominant forms of coordination for social labor: coactive coordination and a posteriori, which means voluntary, and a priori coordination, which is the other 2 forms of this four acts theory that we can see in Marx's studies. So how do we face coactive coordination and a posteriori coordination in abstract terms, with more voluntary coordination, with more a priori or conscious coordination? What does it mean when we say more voluntary coordination? It means management, more democratic management of companies, shared management of companies, social economy companies, solidarious economic companies, basic rent. Basic rent becomes very important here, because upon allowing people just not to focus on survival itself and sheer survival and forgetting about the pressure for survival, that allows them to develop the multi or polyfunctionality and mobility within work, which is the basis of free work, or that voluntary work that Marx refers to in his manuscripts. So not all the authors that talk about basic rent insist on that, but for me it is fundamental, because it is the foundation that can certainly allow for the development of free work beyond creative work. More a priori coordination, which means macroeconomic planning of economy as a whole, effective planning of economic and social functions of the state, which means less coactive coordination. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means existing and developing more plural ways of property and more democratic ways of management, both in companies and public and private organizations. What does it mean when we say less a posteriori coordination? That means establishing regulations, interventions, limitations, and in some cases prohibitions to the free action of markets whenever it is necessary, or as necessary at the different levels of intervention. But there's a rule of thumb, which there is a limit. I mean, no defense, no affirmation of free market between quotes or any other form of macro-social institution can prevent the meeting of the basic needs of everybody, or can it afford to destroy the natural basis of reproduction. That is the limit that no institution can surpass, whether you want to call it the state, the market, or whatever you want to call it. That's a human limit. And about life in general that we have to respect. The next graph, that oval shape, which is elongated and more narrow in the center, it means that under the capitalist regime, what's predominant is coactive and a posteriori coordination of social work, whereas what's undervalued significantly is voluntary coordination and a priori coordination of social work. Coactive coordination is what gives origin to social classes. A posteriori is the one that originates the market relationships and mercantile relationships and the forms of property that result in capitalism. A priori coordination has to do with the capability of economic regulation by the subjects of an economy, of a society, of a community, and voluntary coordination is the basis of free work, as I stated before. So a first approach means transforming this oval shape at least into a circle, or an inverted type of oval, where voluntary work and where a priori conscious coordination should be predominant, or coactive coordinations should be, and a posteriori coordination should be subject to them. The great dependence of the markets. Karpel-Angie made several important annotations that we can take a starting point. The problem is not the market itself. The problem is that what Polanyi called the pretension of self-deregulation of the market, a limitless market, total market. That is the actual problem. And Polanyi did not insinuate it. He said it very clearly. There will be three spheres where mercantile relationships will destroy the conditions of people's lives, and this is when we mercantilize the earth, or we can say the nature, where we mercantilize, he said, labor, now we can say the human being, and when we mercantilize money as a means by excellence of coordination of mercantile relationships, and that's what we're getting to. I mean, the financialization is the extreme development of money's mercantilization that stopped being a monopoly several decades ago. It stopped being a monopoly of the state, and money is now practically created by private banking everywhere around the globe. Regarding the concentration of capitalist wealth, concentration is a law of trends of capitalism that becomes compulsive, but that it's not necessarily unavoidable, which is associated with these two types of coordination, coactive and a posteriori, which I mentioned before. Of course, there are other means of accumulation of wealth, like depossession against farmers, against indigenous populations, depossession through conventional knowledge, pillage of public companies, plundering of communities, taxing, states becoming corporate, and very recently, only 25 years ago, debt money, which is unproductive capital that has grabbed the capitalist economy by the neck, the so-called productive or material economy. What actions can we take? I'm doing it fast because I don't have 2 minutes. The democratization and the socialization of property is fundamental. This is fundamental because even though it is true that we can think about actions and policies as a strong progressive taxing, a democratization of credit, limitations to the use of land property, effective law, anti-monopoly laws, etc., democratization and socialization of property are important. It's already been said here. This is not synonymous with statification. The second question is about how we can get away from the dominant concepts of poverty and wealth that prevail in the society of growth, where science and technology are the drivers of wealth. Let's do it by parts. Wealth and poverty, dominating concepts. Next. Yeah, go back one, sorry. Yeah, it's repeated. Well, wealth and poverty, dominant concepts. This is very important. I've already gave you a preview about it. It is fundamental, first of all, to expand the concept of wealth. And we should approach the idea of wealth in terms of plenitude, rather than material wealth or any other form of wealth, because the way we conceptualize it, even the way to even measure both wealth and poverty, determine completely the horizon of vision and our frameworks of actions and policies. This is very clear when we measure poverty and how poverty is measured in our countries. But something very important is wealth and poverty are not in principle only situations. It's not altogether correct to say I'm in a situation of wealth or I'm in a situation of poverty. This is especially used for poverty. Why? Because, first of all, wealth and poverty are social behaviors. They're orientations of action which are determined by certain production social relationships. Of course, however, it's important to expand the concept of wealth at least in 3 senses. First of all, as wealth, not only as material wealth, but also as wealth of time and relational wealth. Number 2, by adding the importance of this concept of social behavior, and of course, not reducing wealth to capitalist material wealth, which is definitely predominant, but especially this one which is based on accumulation. But also we have to see wealth as thinking of plenitude as enjoyment of consumption, enjoyment of sharing and caring for human beings, enjoyment of caring for nature. Wealth and poverty as dominant concepts, as a matter of fact, have a serious problem, a very serious problem, which is what economists called production of wealth. I mean, that's actually extraction. The concept of material wealth and its relationship to production is problematic. The production of new wealth is associated with what should be simply called extraction. This is why the capitalist calculus is the calculation of a pirate. When a group of pirates would plunder an African town in the 17th century, what did they take into account when calculating the profits of the business? They would take into account the cost of the ship, the hiring of mercenaries, the war weapons they had to purchase, the human lives they destroyed. That was not part of the cost. The cultures that were destroyed, that was not part of the cost. The community they destroyed, that was not part of the cost, etc., etc. So it is a pirate calculation which predominates in the way capitalism calculates production, which deep inside is just about extraction. The next. There is an important problem with science and technology as drivers, are supposedly drivers of the growth of society. Here there are 4 problems to consider. Science and technology in themselves do not drive the growth of society. I mean the society of accumulation. The fundamental problem that's not inherent to capitalism is the fragmentary use of technology, which is also associated with the posteriori coordination of social work. This is consubstantial to practically every social form of production, but in capitalism, this becomes compulsive. And science and technology within capital do have this problem. They create a transcendental illusion, the transcendental illusion that the infinite approximation to ideal concepts is possible in principle through the ad infinitum development of technology. This is the basis of the fetishism of money. What does the fetishism of money say? Marx already studied it regarding the treasurer. He said that money allows to look for or seeks to buy and acquire practically anything infinitely, ignoring that the reproduction of the material conditions of production are absolutely necessary for that. I only have 2 minutes left. How can we escape from the dominant concepts? Well, I already said it. Well, we have to expand the concept of wealth. The starting point, I think, is clear. We have to face the society of growth, which is nothing but... saying the society of growth is a euphemism to say capitalism, to say society and accumulation. Let's say it clearly. Especially because consumism destroys enjoyment. That was studied by Lacan, for instance. How to escape from the dominant concepts of poverty and wealth? Well, poverty is, it's been said, it's more related to a lack of things, and self-contention promoted containment in certain trends. I think it's okay and it's necessary, but it cannot be done without the rediscovery of enjoyment. It is a fundamental condition, of course, guaranteeing everybody's safety and security, but looking at poverty as a thing, well, comes from the duality that Augustine established between corporality and sensuality, in such a way that we need to rediscover enjoyment and the pleasure for consumption that, under the current system, even not only intends to build or manipulate desire, but also needs themselves. I'm going to skip the third point because I ran out of time. I want to go straight to point 4, question 4, about how to understand, defend, and increase the biological and cultural diversity. This is fundamental. Are we there? 4.1. Well, the diversity is the basis of evolution. I think that evolutionists are very clear about that. Without diversity, there is no evolution. Therefore, what's in jeopardy is the future of life. Just 2 lines of action. The systematic intervention of the markets is fundamental. If we do not assume the right to political intervention of the markets, we cannot do anything in principle, and of course a recomposition of social relationships of production themselves. And something very important that has been insinuated here, it's been said as that it is important, and it is, but we have not had the time to discuss it, and it is wisely included in the questions. We need to recover the rhythm of human beings, and we need to recover the human scale. How can we do that? Well, here I'm giving you some general ideas. We have to degrow, we have to accept the planetary limits. We need to strongly fight against the casino type of capitalism, which is dominating us, which actually dominates capitalism in its productive basis. We need to provide warranty of satisfaction for human needs. We have to expand the work of care that we have spoken about. We have to recover the scale of life at work, in consumption, in recreation, when resting, at leisure, in direct relationships, etc. We need to recover the sense of life, and the sense of life is living it. Well, there's also a fifth question here that has to do with how we face the destruction of material wealth. But to finish with, let me just look at the penultimate line, 5.2. Is my time up? 5.2. 5.2. I have 10 general proposals here, just to finish with. We need to subordinate instrumental rationality, which is the rationality of Western society, a new reproductive rationality, and in some cases we need to generalize regulations about the means of production. In other cases, sometimes some forms of production even have to be banned because they go against the reproduction of life. We have to revert the privatization of life. We need to promote inclusive consumption. Let me quote this again, this phrase by Gandhi that has already been said here. Land allows us, or makes it possible for us to meet everybody's needs, but it cannot meet the greediness of just a few. Gradually, we need to substitute market prices, which are extraction prices, for reproduction prices. We need to socialize, ecologize, and feminize markets. Reward work, not wealth, and promote clear strategies of degrowth. Thank you.